I'm Ron Willett. Welcome to Whiskey and Wireless. We're going to sit down with industry professionals, have spirited discussions, and talk about what shaped the wireless industry and why we are where we are today and where we're going to be tomorrow. So this one's a little difficult for me, a little tough for me, and I'll tell you why. So my parents never graduated college, right? Neither of my older brothers graduated college, and I never graduated college, never went to college, none of us, right? There just wasn't a thing for us. So I've always told my kids, who now have broken that streak and are going to college or graduated from college, so it's very cool. But I always tell them, I've been able to have the marginal success that I've had because I just outwork everybody, right? And whether they have a college degree or not, if you outwork them, it's usually better. But for you kind of have both, right? So,
careful where you're going here.
I mean, you have a lot of higher education, but then you also work really hard from what I've seen. I looked at your bio, and I've known you for a little bit through the MEF, and you're a hardworking man. So I wanted to ask about the higher education thing. Did that come from like your family, or is that just something that's always kind of been in you?
Certainly from my family. My grandfather was a sharecropper in southern Ohio, and this was a guy that started off as a farmer, and this was primarily before the Depression. My father was the oldest of 10 children. Only 6 survived to adulthood, and the bracket was male, all girls, and then another male son. So he was the oldest son. His younger brother was 25 years younger. And my father who shared, I guess, similar experience as yours. You've been in radio after the Depression. Went to college at the University of Cincinnati on a football scholarship, which was quite ironic because he was all 5'7".
Well, back then,
it was
easier.
a different dynamic of what football was. And so his father instilled the notion of reading and writing, et cetera. In fact, even though he was a farmer, he ended up writing a book, which I still have a copy of. It was never published, but I still have the original manuscript that he put together. My father then went off into the radio business and then decided to go to law school. And this is, again, prior to World War II. I happened to be born when my father was 51.
Oh, wow.
So a little late in his life. I was the first and only born son. I have I have a sister who's 12 years older. So that was inculcated very early on. And again, he went to law school at night and became a lawyer, and then got drafted into the Army in World War II, became a platoon officer. But because he had been a prior prosecutor in the state of Ohio, in Franklin County, Ohio, he was tapped to become an investigator for the war crimes trials.
Oh, wow.
And because he was a platoon officer at the same time, he literally hunted down those Nazis that they could not find and found them. So he had a rifle platoon with him going off to find these various generals and others who were considered to be war criminals.
Wow.
And then as a result of that, he became a deputy prosecutor at the Nuremberg War Crimes Trials. So all that was long before I was born, believe it or not.
Right, but great stories to hear as you're growing
yes.
up.
Oh, yeah. He used to talk about, I remember in high school, a good friend of mine who's very into history asked my father, so Mr. Ruppert, what did you do in World War II? And his answer was, I hunted down Nazis, tried them, and hung them.
That's a lot different experience than most people have.
Yeah. So I had that element in terms of education and the quality of education and the pursuit of education. And then ironically, on a personal level, because I was born late in my father's life, well, it turned out when I was in college, he was developing Alzheimer's. He had been a fairly successful lawyer. He'd run for Congress, of all things, but again, right after I was born. And as a result of him going into Alzheimer's and suffering from that, I had to drop out of college. And then I had to hustle if I wanted to get my degree. And my purpose was very focused on, I wanted to get the degree from where I started, a university called Washington University in St. Louis. And of all things, I sold stereos for 2.5 years.
Got the hustle down pat.
That's right. So that was, that's a long answer to a very short question, but that's how I looked and respected education just from my own experience and my own family. My mother, on the other hand, was an artist. She had studied a little bit at the Sorbonne. She happened to be French. So I had that opportunity very early on to travel internationally. When I was 6 years old, my mother was dragging me to France for family reunions for 3 weeks.
See, I didn't go out of overseas until I joined the Army in 1991, and I lived in Korea for a year.
Wow.
And I always said that that experience kind of changed my life and my perspective of things. You know, when you go somewhere else, and maybe not so much anymore, I don't know, but when you go somewhere else, I just feel like you have a different perspective of the world and how
Yes.
both how big and how small it is, right? I mean, you go to some places that have never heard of, you know, Coke or Pepsi, right? And they have their own thing that's equally huge that you've never heard of, and that's strange. But then you turn a corner and there's a McDonald's or a Burger King, right? So it's just one of those things that that it was just a different perspective for me, and I really enjoyed my travel. And I always said that if I had kids, I would have them go overseas, and so far we've been able to do that with most of them.
Yeah,
So
fully agree.
yeah, I
Relative
think
to
the
even
travel,
early and late in life,
yeah,
it doesn't
yeah,
really matter.
and just not to be scared of it, right?
Right.
So we never got, the only time I ever got on a plane was once we flew to California to bring my aunt's RV back with her 80-pound German Shepherd, and the air condition went out somewhere in Texas. So that was that was my one plane ride, and it
Okay.
wasn't an easy ride back. But now, you know, obviously we go everywhere. And my kids, both two of my older kids, live in New York City, and they travel quite frequently. And they just jump on a plane and go to Italy or whatever it is,
Yeah,
and it's
it's
crazy. Not with my money either; they do it with their own.
good
So
for
it's just
them.
kind of cool to see. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's no question relative to the impact of seeing other cultures, other economies, other dynamics, even the notion of how people get along with each other. I'm the product of a war bride. I once asked my father, how did you approach mom since you don't speak French?
Right.
You have a
Right.
little bit of English, joking with him, as well as a little bit of German. He goes, well, that was easy. I just walked to her and said, la lune est claire, n'est-ce pas? Which is the moon is clear, isn't it? And from there, it was a
It
lifetime.
blossomed. Was he
That's
in
right.
a uniform? Girls like a good uniform, so you
Perhaps
know
so.
that.
Yeah, he didn't
Yeah.
mention that in the conversations, but I've got a couple photos of him exactly in the full Class A
Oh
uniforms.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. So speaking of my time in the Army in '91 through '95, and then after that, I got out and got into radio for
mhm.
9 years
So
with.
what was your MOS in the Army?
I was a 19 Delta Cavalry
Okay,
Scout. So
okay,
I joined in 1991 when Desert Storm had first been, you know,
sure.
announced or started or whatever. My father was actually over there, and he was in the reserves, and so he had got called over, and I was listening to Lee Greenwood, and just got, you know, got all into the moment, and
I
went
can
and
relate.
went
I
and
can relate.
signed up. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I just say, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I just, you know, I want to fight. And so, you know, 19 Delta was the gig. And so I went in there, and, you know, it's 16 weeks of basic training, and for 19 Deltas. And about week 10, I guess, the war ended or whatever it was, you know, Desert
Hmm.
Storm kind of ended. And I was like, all right, we'll see you later. I'm going to go home. And apparently that's not the way the Army works. So I ended up staying in for the 4 years. But I had a blast. It was good. Another thing that I thought really changes your perspective. And I didn't
Yeah,
get the college thing right, so I didn't get to go stay in a dorm or anything. And you know, hearing my daughter's stories now about, you know, her dorm mates and the bond that
sure.
they've already started to create, it does make you think of the barracks and being in
Or
the
a
Army,
foxhole
and
experience while you're
or a
trying to get through
foxhole. Yeah.
applied physics, which is in the back behind me.
Right. Yeah. 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 So it's just, it was a good experience, and I really did enjoy it. But I just knew it wasn't for me for a lifetime. Right. It was good for
Sure.
4 years, but not for a lifetime. And so yeah. So then I got out and got into radio because Harry Carey used to drink beer and watch baseball and get paid for it, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And then that took, you know, 9 or 10 years of my life, and then I
Wow.
got fired from there and came to Clear Channel. So 2004 was kind of my first telecom experience. But by then, for you, I mean, what are you, 15 years already in messaging
I
by
got in
2004?
Well, I got into the mobile telecommunications business by helping launching one of the first GSM operators in North America, and fell into it by completely by accident. And that was in 1997.
Oh,
That
okay.
company was Pacific Bell Mobile Services, sometimes called Pacific Telesis, one of the 7 original sisters
Oh, okay.
that
Yep.
AT&T had been broken up into. Today, you know that brand as AT&T.
Mm-hmm.
So through its evolutions and also rebranding, and that's how I got into the business. Again, by luck, in the context of, you touched upon earlier, I had spent a career in the in the political world, and was looking to get out of it because I didn't see much of a long-term prospect in that business, and it is a business,
It is a
just like
business.
anything else.
Right.
And my wife happened to be a former executive recruiter, and her former boss had went off to Europe to run an office for A.T. Kearney. And gave me a call and he said, "Hey, I got a job that I think you'd be really well suited for. It's in California, business development in a new thing called mobile telecommunications." Little did he know that I'd already started looking at that in terms of telecom spectrum, specifically in Germany. So I had a sense of, yeah, Dick, I know exactly what you're talking about. And we went through and he was like, yeah, you'd be perfect for this. So
So
ended
you
up,
already had that global mind from the
oh,
very
definitely
beginning.
global
Yeah.
mindset. Again, primarily because, again, my experience of from the time I was 6 to the time I was 16, I spent about 3 to 6 weeks every year in France and Germany. My sister is older. She ended up wearing an army officer when I was about in middle school. So I was going over to Kaiserslautern, which is an American army base near Frankfurt. So I had all that exposure to it. And then even as an executive inside Pac Bell Wireless, I had the opportunity to get into the international space. I was the international roaming director, which was the guy who does all the commercial agreements with all the other mobile network operators all around the world, which was around 1,100 GSM operators at that time. And that too was almost by chance how that came up. I asked a question of a new CEO in a brown bag lunch. Why is it that we only have about 15 roaming agreements? And meanwhile, the guys in Belgium and the guys in France, et cetera, have 50 and 60. And he was like, that's a very good question.
See, you don't want to be the guy always asking the questions because then the answer is, well, why don't you go figure out why that
You got
is?
it. By
Yeah.
that afternoon, he called me into his office and said, "Hey, I've heard a lot of good things about you in terms of business development. Of all things, I'd set up kiosks in the airports, the international airports in California and Nevada, to rent handsets."
Oh, okay.
Because this is back when handsets were not roamable, if you will,
Right.
from
Right.
the
Yeah.
Europe to the U.S. So I literally had to start a business from scratch, a retail business from scratch, notwithstanding my prior experience selling stereos. But you get the idea
Yeah.
in that context, and that's why I asked the question: why is it there's such a discrepancy? And I already came to the conversation a little prepared. It was like, we've got the 7 most visited destinations in the United States in California alone. So we should be able to get more revenues out of roaming, shouldn't we? Well, he had already been on the board of a French-based mobile operator called Bouygues, because Bouygues was about 25% owned by Southwestern Bell at the time, when the carriers had interchangeable ownership of each other. And he's like, "That's a great question and something I've been thinking about." And literally about 3 hours later, I get a call from his PA. He was like, "Hey, can you come down and talk to Ron because we've got a question that he'd like to ask you?" I was like, "Oh God, what did I
What
do?"
did I do now? Yeah.
Yeah, and he said, that question was in the back of my mind. You're the first to ask this, and we need to have a new international roaming director because, in fact, we didn't have one. And so I got that mantle. And
Look
in
at
the
that.
next 2.5 plus years, arranged about 110 roaming agreements, drove a business up to about $180 million. It was actually quite easy to do that. But more importantly, this was long before the age of Zoom calls.
Right.
So if you wanted to know, you had to go.
Right.
That's how I put it. And so ended up traveling all around the world. I would literally have times where I was 2 weeks in Asia, come back to, I lived in California at the time, in San Francisco, 2 weeks in San Francisco. Then the next 2 weeks would be in Europe, come back 2 weeks in San Francisco, and do that repeatedly for about
Wow.
6 months.
And
Yeah.
and what, you got 20% of the overall revenue just went straight to your pocket? I mean,
You got it. And believe it or not, there were actually individuals in San Francisco and Pac Bell at the time, $40,000 a month roaming bills.
Oh my goodness.
And in 2 cases, I had to reach out to him. I was like, I got to find out what these people do for a living because
Yeah.
I have no clue.
Yeah.
And so back in the day when you could make a telephone call and say, hi, my name is Paul Ruppert. I'm an executive with Pac-Bell Wireless. Thank you so much for your service. We're really intrigued as to what is it you do that you are taking all these trips internationally. In both cases, they were investment bankers.
Oh, wow.
Back in the day where investment bankers were a thing.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, international roaming has changed a bit since
imagine.
then. Things are a little different now. And then the messaging space really exploded, kind of after that time, 2000s or whatever, where we're
early
talking
2000s.
Yeah, we're talking about
there too.
P2P first, right?
Exactly. Interoperability had not existed in voice, and interoperability relative to SMS, short message services, which was native to the GSM radio format, had not transferred into other formats. And once again, I got a call from somebody who was like, hey, Paul, I've heard all these things about you, and I'm at this new startup. And I was like, new startup, what does it do? Well, we provide interoperability between IP-based solutions like for CDMA, TDMA, IDEN, all the various other radio formats in GSM. And I literally said, that's BS. That's not possible technologically.
It's not going to work, right?
Here I am with my electrical engineering degree from Washington University, not. Political science, okay? Graduate degree in government, not at all. But I was like, I have never heard of such a thing.
Right.
Sat down, went through the process. It just happened to be in Washington, D.C. I was like, yeah, this is real. And they said, would you be interested in joining us? Where do you think you'd fit? And I was like, well, I can leverage all my experience being an international roaming director right into the messaging space because back then, all the SMS interoperability agreements were embedded into the roaming agreements. So the roaming agreements, the people who were managing that were the same people who were also managing the SMS.
You already knew everybody.
So I already knew everybody, exactly. Yeah. And that's what I ended up doing in the context of let's do this. Built that out from literally a blank page in terms of it being what I used to call a cockroach startup. And then from there, 5 years later, we sold it for $427 million, $116 million in revenues.
Wow.
And my piece was the international piece. I used to say we're going global from the start, which is exactly what we did. We blitzkrieged the organization, as it's called now, which is essentially going to market everywhere we could. I used to have a strategy which was parallel priorities. We might be looking at 25 different operators, but as soon as we got traction with one, we migrated emphasis and focus on that, more resources, i.e. like going from Deutsche Telecom to T-Mobile UK or back to Bouygues, depending on what was going on, or Saudi Telecom, and then go from there.
Wow.
So it was quite the ride.
Did you envision that texting would become such a fabric of who we are and what we do?
No, not at that point. I mean, there's a great picture from Wired magazine, which is from the early 2000s, and it's a whole bunch of kids who are at a fountain in Helsinki, Finland, and it's all about the phenomenon of texting. Well, oddly enough, I had been in Helsinki, Finland, and that was something that happened every day after school.
Just everyone went to the fountain.
They just coalesced. Yeah, they congregated. That's how they were making connections. Instead of, like when I was in high school, we'd go to Burger King and McDonald's.
Right.
That's what they were doing. And they were texting with each other.
By the way, when I was in high school, we would go to the smoking lounge because they had a smoking section in the high school that if you wanted to smoke. Oh, yeah. Edison High School. Yeah. We had a smoker's lounge. So,
good for you.
Yeah. I didn't smoke, but, it was a cool place to hang out.
Exactly.
So,
hang with the cool kids.
That's right. But yeah, so, texting just took off and 160 characters, which is, crazy to me that just to see the evolution of that, right? And,
absolutely.
And so, we were at Clear Sky, we weren't really involved a lot in texting, the SMS portion. We did have an MMSC. We were one of the first non-carriers to have an MMSC, the first non-carrier to have a hosted WAP gateway.
Okay.
So, the mobile browsing thing. And now you look at browsing and everything that's been. And so, a question for you is, when I think back, I still, and we've had a certain amount of success. The last few years especially has been very, very good to Clear Sky and to me. but I think back on the things that I missed, right? So we would go to CTIA shows and they would say content is coming and content is king
Yeah.
and content, and I had no idea what that meant or how to make
Yeah.
money off of it. And then now I look back in a rearview mirror and go, oh, that's what they meant. And apps were the other thing, right? So apps were, I remember there was one and they said something about, well, you can only use one app at a time on a phone. And I would be like,
Or
well, why would
widgets
you
back then
why would you
too.
ever want to use more than one app on a phone?
Yeah.
And then, now I see, how apps have evolved and taken off and done all that. And it makes me go, man, there's been a lot of millionaires and billionaires since we got into this business. So what has been successful for you and what kind of have you missed? Is there anything that you've missed that?
Well, like you and like everybody else, the whole iPhone phenomenon
Yeah.
was something back then as to
2007,
who
man.
knew. I think I even wrote a blog relative to the obscurity of the iPhone at that stage of development and sales, but it just completely exploded as a technological and commercial phenomenon. So that would be the ones that I missed. I think the ones that I probably, or the one that I got right was back to going global from the start.
Yeah.
Inside a startup environment, that was something that was kind of like anathema. I convinced the board in my case, essentially, we've got to be able to do this because at the end, it's going to be accretive. And if the other guys are just focusing on the domestic U.S. market, which was our competitors at the time, or others in Europe, et cetera, that I was aware of, we recognized that we'd be the only ones that would be breaching this. And bridging that international and domestic, from an American perspective or a North American perspective. Excuse me. And that's one that I certainly got right in the context of how it exploded. It helped that, we had, the time it was like the fifth most often spoken second language at home was Tagalog. And at the same time, in the Philippines, was also the most message-dense nation on earth, where Filipinos were texting all the time. That's why I say those phenomena you can't control.
Yeah.
But if you start seeing them evolve, it's like having the right vision. It's not vision set in the moment. It's a vision over the horizon, which is something I talk about often. And that's probably one that I got right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, we had a little bit of problems with international before I was in charge of Clear Sky because we did a lot of business in Latin America.
Sure.
And didn't really understand the Latin American market as well, and especially the politics of the Latin American market, right? So, for a small company like Clear Sky was then, I think, at that point we might have had 15 people working there or whatever. And Chavez comes into Venezuela and all of a sudden, our $1 million business is gone because he doesn't do business with Americans.
Right.
And then he doesn't pay his bills of what he owed. And it just put a real stress on the company. So we kind of went the other way where we said we're not going to do business in Latin America or really anywhere else, just in the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah.
And then when I took over in 2019, we kind of changed that a little bit, started focusing more on the Caribbean and doing a lot more in the Caribbean. And now we even do some business in Europe and some other places. But the Caribbean's really, along with the U.S. and Canada, kind of our niche, as I talked about at the last convention that we were at for MEF, where you moderated a panel that I was on. So, yeah.
And thank you for that. You had great insights. And you said I asked a good question.
You did.
So,
yeah.
I got to throw you that bouquet right back.
That's right. Asking good questions. And I think, I had 2 minutes of prep time from the time I walked in the door till the time my panel was.
Not even a time to have a cup of coffee. Yeah, you did very well.
But yeah, it was a good time. And the MEF is a good organization. And you've been involved with them for a while, haven't you? Or...
Yeah, for the last year, I've been advisor to the MEF. I've been in the past a member of the MEF in terms of my consulting organization, and they asked me to come in to kind of help elevate their activities relative to the North American region. Primarily because of the membership, et cetera, it's been more skewed to European members. But the reality is that most of those especially the large European players, i.e. like the likes of Cinch or Infobip, they may be European, but most of their revenues come out of the North America and the U.S. specifically.
They've come in pretty hard into the U.S.
That's right. And so even now, the message, we had an FCC commissioner talking about having a higher profile in terms of the regulatory aspects of the industry. That's something that is a constant threat, if you will, and a constant threat of friction in the marketplace. So we want to try to, that's one of the things that I'm trying to focus on in terms of getting more resources and more activities in that area.
Yeah, and us too with A2P, right? So with
Correct.
A2P, we're really working on bringing RCS for us, bringing RCS to the regional carriers, because our fear, I guess, our thought is that once RCS is the predominant messaging for tier one players, then people who go to fraud and spam are going to then move to the
Right.
tier two and tier three. So we have to make sure. I like to say Clear Sky isn't innovative in the way that we're coming up with new products. We're innovative in the way that we look at what's happening at the tier ones, and we have to find a way to scale that down for the regional carriers, which is difficult because it's maybe not easy, but it's easier to make something work when you have 300 million subscribers or 100
Yeah.
million subscribers as opposed to a 20,000 subscriber carrier in the middle of the US, which
Yeah.
are absolutely necessary but difficult to bring
Yeah,
those
you're the
products.
pros from Dover, if you will, in the context of here's what we see in terms of how to be able to improve your swing
Right.
or whatever else, however you want to characterize it as a metaphor. And because you've got that perspective that's coming, those individuals and those executives in those smaller operators, they just may not have that exposure.
Right.
Not because of anything they're doing wrong, it's just not that type of exposure on a day-to-day basis as you've taken advantage of. So you become, somewhat also of a sheepdog in the context of you're trying to migrate all of your shepherd, your flock, I should say, towards a specific direction because
Right.
you see what's coming.
Right, and we are the arm and the extension of that carrier when it comes to A2P or messaging or RCS or network APIs or whatever it is that's on the horizon. So.
And do you find that you're more aligned with some, direct carrier aggregators are called, or CPaaS communications platforms as service providers than others because of that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So to the carriers, we just become a super aggregator, basically. And to the aggregators, I become the fourth or fifth largest carrier in the United States because I have 42 carriers behind me. So
Right.
we work with InfoBib a lot. I've been to Croatia and done that whole thing. We work with Cineverse and Vibes and Cinch and just all of them, Cisco. We work with all of those on a regular basis for our carriers to try to get
You're
them
an honest broker, neutral player in this
I try to
game.
stay a neutral player. It's difficult because revenue is important, and business is important, but we have to be careful not to step too far into an aggregator's business. But then also we have to have products and services for our carriers, and we just don't want to resell everything of theirs. So we kind of got to make it our own. So it's it's been a successful journey the last 4 or 5 years, especially. But yeah, the aggregators have been really good for us.
So you raised RCS as a potential opportunity that also might have some friction around it. What else do you see just over the horizon relative to the technology, that we all embrace and push on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, and I'll ask you the same thing when I'm done.
Darn.
Yeah. So, but you have some time to think. So RCS for us obviously is as someone said at MEF, I have kids that aren't as old as RCS, right? RCS has been around for a long time. It just is now just starting to see kind of the light of day.
Yeah.
So I'm actually flying up tomorrow to RCS World in New York City, and we'll be talking to a lot of businesses and enterprises about what they're going to do and how they're going to utilize RCS. So it's almost like a new phase is coming. Right. And so I don't want to look beyond RCS a lot because to me, RCS hasn't even hit yet. Right. So we have our first carrier that's doing a carrier build with Apple and with Google. And we have our first carrier that's going to be launching by the end of this month on RCS. And then once that happens, then that'll open the floodgates for all the regional carriers to be able to join and be able to have us, because Google's not going to go to each individual carrier anymore. So they're coming to us and some other companies, and they're saying, you guys go enable all the regional carriers in the U.S. and the Caribbean, and then we'll do a contract with you.
Right.
And Google doesn't want to do a contract with the aggregators. We're going to do that. So we'll bill RCS for Business or RBM, for the carriers with those aggregators.
You become the gateway.
Right.
The gatekeeper.
And much like you with international roaming, we have to be careful because we're a smaller company. So I have to be careful about what shiny objects I chase. And we don't chase dollars anymore. We make enough money where we don't have to do that, but we can be selective. And and so for us though, because we're in the A2P business, we're working with all of these aggregators. So now to go to RBM, it's simple because it's all the same people, right?
Right.
It's all the same people that I already know, that I already have contracts and relationships with. So it just makes it very easy for me to get into the RBM business
Right.
for our carriers. And it's something, more importantly, that our carriers need to stay on par with the tier ones.
Mm-hmm.
So between that and network APIs, which we also think is very important, and we're working with Eddie DeCurtis from Shush, who
Mm-hmm.
I know and we're working with his product, and we're bringing that to the regional carriers as well. And so our philosophy for the regional carriers is you don't have to pay Clear Sky a lot of money. We'll make money from the aggregators who make money from the enterprises,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll rev share that with the carriers. So our main goal down the horizon is that we bring $1 of ARPU for every subscriber in that carrier network. So, if it's 30,000 subscriber carrier, I want to be writing that carrier $30,000 checks
Sure.
every month.
Sure.
And that makes a big difference for them. I know, in the grand scheme of T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T, that's not a lot of money. But for these guys to have a vendor that doesn't charge them and then writes some checks at the end of every month for $30,000, $40,000, that makes a big difference to the way they're able to do business.
Absolutely. And even your pricing model, the way you've constructed it was very similar to what we did in messaging back in the day, where we demonstrated there was an automatic lift in international messaging towards international calls, which is a highly profitable initiative. So we were showing how by spending $1 with us, you're going to be making $1.25, not only with the text message replies, but also the fact that after 3 text messages on an international basis, people were making a telephone call, and that would be an international roaming call or an international call, direct.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm interested in what's going to transpire is how the various nations or regions respond to RCS in the context of RCS is already kind of in the field, in the marketplace, in India, in Germany, and now we're starting to get it in the field and in the market in the United States. And whether the U.S. phenomenon of dealing with RCS is not only from an operational perspective different or similar to those others in other countries and other regions around the world, as well as how the market, the consumers are going to reply or respond to RCS.
It is going to be interesting because we're kind of used to, in a certain way, writing a lot of laws and being the
We're going to
first
do it
to
our
do
way.
some things, right?
Yeah.
And this is the way we're going to do it, right? And then we have 3 major players that don't always even get along just within themselves, right? I have this vision that they all sit in a room and one of them picks who's going to be the pain in the butt on whatever new technology it is, right? And so with RCS, they've already changed the language standards on July 18th. And then, there'll be more. I think, for future wise, if I was going to say anything about the future, I would say that the future is going to look different than it does today, which is a pretty easy prediction to make.
Indeed.
But something's going to
How
change,
wise
right?
of you.
Yeah, right. The only thing that's for certain is that things are going to change.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And what about you? Do you feel that RCS is going to?
Well, I'm a little jaded. I feel like, I'm the angel who left heaven, so to speak, because I used to consult to the GSM Association 8 years ago on the evangelization of RCS.
Right.
And that was back in the day that, was messaging as a platform was all the rage in terms of the discussion and the focus, et cetera. So I've ridden that arc, and because I'm not an emotional guy and try to be more analytical, but sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not.
Right.
The reality is, I've seen this TV show before,
right?
So I can step back and recognize that 5 years for an adoption of a new generation of a technology, nothing new in that. Right. So it's just going to happen eventually. It's just a matter of patience.
Right. And
that's kind of how I look at it.
Luckily for us, we didn't get involved fast. We didn't get involved quickly because my vision and my discipline has to be around what is successful at the tier ones, what is very close to becoming successful, and then bringing that instead of going out and trying to find the next big thing and letting the tail wag the dog. We just don't have enough money or resources for that.
Yeah.
So it's always it's always about knowing who you are in the business world, and I think we've done a good job
Your
of that
fit, exactly,
in the
your
last
niche.
in the last 5 years. So the Whiskey and Wireless podcast team has done a lot of research and
Indeed.
a couple things that
All right, here
from
it
a
comes.
personal level. So what do you do from a personal level? So some things I've heard is that you're an avid skier. Is that correct? Do you ski?
Yes, I was a ski instructor for about 20 odd years.
Well,
So,
there you go. Look at that.
yeah,
Right on. There
yeah,
we go.
I know who told you that. The other avid skier and ski instructor in the business,
Mm.
Brian Jones Lancey. So,
No, he didn't tell me that, but
oh, really?
I didn't
Okay.
know he was either.
Yeah,
Look at that. Yeah.
Brian's, in the echelon of the hierarchy of ski instructors, and
Yeah.
there, believe me or not, that exists. I am a level 2 certified instructor, which takes a fair amount of time. It's about 3 years of teaching, and you've got
Wow.
to take tests. And I can talk about movement analysis and all these other great things, progressions in terms of instruction. It's really quite interesting how much you have to learn about educational theory when you're just teaching people how to do something.
How to ski, yeah.
Yeah, but Brian is at a higher level, which is the highest level available, which is he's a level 3.
Oh,
So
okay.
if Brian should be interviewed by you, you can
I'll
throw
ask him
that on
about
the
it. Yeah.
table in terms of what does it take to become a level 3 ski instructor,
Right.
Brian?
Well, being from Florida, I've skied all the hills of Florida,
Yeah.
and that's not a lot. So
Understood.
yeah,
Understood.
we don't know a lot about it, but I do go to it's called Snowshoe in North Carolina
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Ski Beach in North Carolina.
Okay.
That's my idea of
I haven't been
skiing.
to those, but
You
I've
don't
skied in
want to.
China, I've
Yeah.
skied in France,
Right.
Germany, Italy.
Right, which means you don't want to ski in those places
Yeah,
because you wouldn't
yeah,
call it skiing. But for me, it was fun.
yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's have you been doing that your whole life or?
Yeah, I started, believe it or not, when I was 6 years old.
Mm.
My sister is 12 years older than I am. My parents took us to a ski resort. A ski resort is really very loosely defined outside of Cleveland, Ohio, which had a
Okay,
vertical about
okay, that
600
might be on the
feet.
same par as Ski Beach and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, at least we got snow, or they could make snow as a result of it.
Hmm.
And I ended up being on a ski racing team in junior high, and ended
wow.
up skiing places in high school, and then stopped for about 10 years, just because I couldn't afford it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's
And
become an expensive hobby
sport
for
of
sure.
kings is the way it is these
Right.
days.
Well, for me, God has a sense of humor. He made me a good bowler, and that's pretty much it. So,
That's-
I don't get to go to all the exotic places and do all the cool
yeah,
things. So,
yeah.
not a lot of
Although I haven't,
street cred in bowling.
yeah, it's
But
true.
also,
Well, I don't know about that, but
also on top of snow skiing is also shooting, right? You do some skeet shooting, is that correct?
yeah, I am a skeet shooter, indeed, a target shooter. Yep.
Yeah.
Haven't
And
done that for about 2 years or so, but picked that up about 10 years ago and enjoy doing it. It's a lot of precision and planning and strategy, believe it or
isn't there an
not.
Olympic sport where you can
Oh,
ski and
absolutely.
shoot? I mean, that should be your gig.
Actually, there is, but it's a different type of shooting.
Oh,
So
okay.
instead of a shotgun, you're shooting a 22 long rifle
Mm.
that's all decked out with all kinds of, activities. And the skiing part is essentially cross-country skiing.
Right.
So it's
right.
about controlling your breathing as well as your heart rate, and trying to be accurate while you're pulling the trigger. I mean, it's great fun to watch, at least for somebody like me. I'm
Right,
like,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think what's called modern pentathlon is what it's
Right.
called.
Well, I think that you picked another one that's not exactly cheap in skeet shooting, and
Well, I'll tell you straight out that I like to watch professional football and the NFL. Okay,
who's your team?
I don't have a team. I play for I root for who's playing at the time.
Okay.
Okay, meaning what am I watching at that time? I mean, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I even knew a professional football player because he ended up marrying my best friend's sister.
Okay.
And oddly enough, my best friend's father was the Wilson Sporting Goods rep for all of Ohio. So he had responsibility for all the professional sporting teams. So that was the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Browns, the Cleveland Indians, the Cincinnati Bengals, etc. So I'd go over to my friend Mark Oldenburg's house. I'll drop one for Mark
There we
Oldenburg
go.
out there. And there was always a professional athlete doing something.
Oh, wow,
So
that's cool.
that was the Cleveland Browns, but the Browns have like the second or the worst winning record in the last 30 years in the NFL
They
or
are
something
not
like that.
associated with a winning philosophy. That's
Yeah,
for
and I
sure.
live in Washington, and I came to Washington, D.C. out of college, and that was during the height of the Joe Gibbs era.
Oh, yeah.
So, that was essentially the Washington Redskins
Yep,
and the
yep.
two-time Super Bowl winners. So that's probably, if anything,
That's your guys.
Yeah, I would say that might be the
So
case.
I
But
grew up in D.C. I grew up in Fairfax County,
okay,
Alexandria, Virginia.
yeah,
So I grew up there, and so I moved there at the time the Redskins were
we're
great,
hot.
and
Yeah,
we picked the Rams, and so we decided to like the
okay.
L.A. Rams, and I have ever since. So
Well, wasn't that like the St. Louis Rams at
no,
that
no, they were
stage?
still L.A. It was in the
Okay,
70s. So yeah,
okay.
yeah. Then they
With
moved to
Roman
St. Louis. I was
Gabriel
like, they're
and
getting closer,
Joe
and then
Namath played for those Rams,
yeah, they
probably.
did. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So, well, I appreciate your insights and talking a little bit about
So
personal
I
stuff.
got a question for you. You know,
Yeah.
my crack research team has told me that you like a form of bingo.
I don't know what that means.
Well, with bingo, there are 3 things that go on, or 5 things that go on before you can score. You know, you can state bingo, right? And one of them is how often a word comes up in your
Oh, that's
conversations.
true. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And so I'm thinking, where's the word? I was told that the word might be
Ah.
clavicle,
No, yeah,
might be
that's right. I
anaconda,
forgot all
or
about that.
might
Ah,
be
my friend is going to be so
tapeworm.
upset with me. Yeah,
And I'm wondering, okay, if I know 3 of them, how do I get to the other 2 where we can
right.
say bingo?
No, you're right. So tapeworm was the one that I was supposed to get in on this episode, and I guess by default,
You
I
got
kind
it,
of got
man.
it in. Yeah, I
That's
always
right.
get one word in, and I totally forgot about it this time. So
Clavicle and anaconda. I'm wondering
they were
about
all
that
in
one.
previous episodes. Yeah,
Yeah.
we got it all
Okay.
done. Yeah.
So what are the next 2?
Yeah,
You're
I
not going
can't
to
tell
say
you that.
anything.
Can't tell you that. It's all a secret. So,
Indeed.
yeah. Well, thanks for stopping by. We really
Ron,
appreciate
this
it.
has been great. Thank you so much for the invitation, especially
Anytime.
having the opportunity to have a Johnny Walker Blue at 10:30 in the morning.
It's always great.
Indeed. Indeed.
All
So
right.
cheers.
Yep. Cheers. Thank you very much.
Take care.